always liked flea markets. From an early age, I felt an inexplicable attraction to these places, as if each object there carried a secret waiting to be discovered. There was something magical in the act of scouring wooden boxes full of trinkets, smelling old paper and rusty metal, touching surfaces worn out of time, and imagining the hands that have already held those things before me. My grandfather said that certain objects had soul. I laughed at this as a child, but that Saturday, something reminded me of his words. It was a small market, mounted on a vacant lot, surrounded by makeshift canvas and iron stalls. The heat was fragling the cracked asphalt, and the smell of frying mixed with the odor of moist wood and dust. I was almost leaving when I saw the tent at the end of the street. It didn't seem to be part of the market. The fabric that the coverage was dark, faded, different from the bright colors of the other tents. There were no signs or tracks announcing products, just a low table covered with old and priceless objects. The seller was a thin man with pale skin and black eyes, as if he hasn't slept for days. He didn't call customers, didn't smile, didn't offer anything. He just watched me when I approached, without blinking. The table was full of strange things: broken watches, rusty keys, porcelain dolls with cracked eyes. And it was among them that I saw that. It was small, the size of the palm of my hand. An amulet, perhaps a pendant, of aged bronze. The metal was cold to the touch, despite the heat. The form made no sense at first sight, a mix of abstract symbol and something vaguely human. I passed the thumb over the carvings and felt a slight tingling on my fingers. It was a subtle discomfort, like a static shock that didn't hurt. "That has a story," the salesman murmured, his voice hoarse, too low for the surrounding noise. I looked at him, waiting for him to continue, but he just kept that fixed look. "History of what?" I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It seemed satisfied, as if I was waiting for me to ask. "Have you heard an object called by the owner?" The question took me by surprise. I laughed, uncomfortable. "Are you saying this is cursed?" He didn't answer. It only tilted his head slightly to the side, the dark eyes and backgrounds analyzing my face. The tingling sensation increased. I should have dropped the amulet right there, but I didn't drop it. Maybe it was curiosity. Perhaps it was that strange compulsion I felt the moment I touched him. Whatever it was, before I realized, it was already taking off my wallet from my pocket. The seller reached out. He didn't ask how much I wanted to pay. There was no price label, but somehow I felt that we already knew how much value. I delivered the notes, and he closed the long fingers about the money, still with that strange smile. "I hope you hear when he talks to you." What did he mean by that? I should have asked, but for some reason, the desire to continue the conversation disappeared as soon as the amulet was in my pocket. I pulled away from the tent without looking back, and as I mixed with the crowd, I had a strange feeling, as if something was accompanying me. The hot breeze on the market ceased for a moment. The muffled heat was replaced by a cold shiver rising through the spine. And for a second, I swear I heard a whisper, too low to understand, but loud enough to make me accelerate my step. That night, I put the amulet on the office shelf and went to sleep. It was just another piece for my collection, or at least that's what I thought. I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. The room was dark and silent, but there was something wrong, the type of wrong that is not explained, only feels. An uncomfortable feeling, like when you get into an environment and realize that someone was there just before, but see no one. At first I thought it was the heat. The air seemed heavier, as if dense, almost palpable. I ran my hand on my face and turned on the bed, tried to ignore the discomfort, but then I heard a low sound, almost imperceptible, a whisper. My body stiffened at the same time. It was not my imagination. It wasn't the wind. The windows were closed, the air conditioner off. No car passed the street. No neighbor spoke loudly. Just that sound, weak, indistinct. I closed my eyes, trying to rationalize. Perhaps it was some noise of the house, a crackling pipe, the distant noise of an electronic device. But it didn't look like any sound. It looked like a voice, and came from inside the room. The breathing was stuck in the throat. I was completely still, listening, trying to distinguish words, but the whisper was irregular, as if it were out of sync over time, oscillating near and far. Silence suddenly came back, abrupt, as if the sound had never existed. Only then did I allow myself to slow down the air. Shit, I muttered to myself, feeling my heart still rapidly. I tried to laugh at my own paranoia. A whisper? I was letting my imagination affect me. Exhaustion could preach pieces. I closed my eyes again, determined to ignore that. But sleep didn't come. And then I felt something. Not a touch, not a movement. Just a subtle change in the air. As if someone were there, watching. My body shivered whole. The silence of the room now seemed heavier, dense. I tried to convince myself that it was just the psychological. But when I looked at the digital clock by the bed, the numbers were erased. Did the energy fall? No. The fan was still shaking softly in the corner of the room. So why was only the watch off? The stomach rolled with perception. I forced myself to sit on the bed, feeling the cold sweat on my back. The darkness around me seemed deeper than before. I took a deep breath, trying to seek some logic for that. Maybe the clock had stopped alone. Maybe the whisper was some noise from outside that I just imagined being close. Perhaps. A new sound broke my thoughts. A dry crack coming from the corridor. My skin torn whole. I was no longer alone. I got up slowly, without making noise. I walked to the bedroom door, leaning my ear in the wood. Nothing, but the sense of presence was almost suffocating. My heart beat so hard that it seemed to echo inside my head. I turned the doorknob carefully, opening the door enough to spy down the hallway. The light of the room was still on. I had left this way before I bed, but something seemed strange. The shadows were on. For a moment, I was just stopped there, trying to understand what was different. The couch, the bookcase, the table, everything was in place, but the shadow contours seemed slightly displaced, as if something invisible was standing there, blocking the light in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. And then, in the middle of that heavy silence, I heard again. This time was close, very close. I felt a whisper in my ear. It was a low, broken, drag sound. I didn't understand the words. I don't know if they were words, but the tone was someone who was trying to call me. My vision darkened for a second, and a chill went up the spine, almost like an electric current passing through my body. My instinct shouted to run, to get out of there, but my legs were stuck on the floor, as if something held me without touching. And then everything stopped. The shadows returned to normal. The weight in the air disappeared. Silence was just silence again. I looked back into the room. The digital clock now marked 3:17. I wasn't sure if he had really turned off before. Maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe it was tiredness. Perhaps. But deep down I knew it was not my mind preaching pieces. Something there wanted to be heard. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to have not listened. In the following days, I tried to act as if nothing is happening. I convinced myself that they were just coincidences, that tiredness was distorting my perception. But the truth is that I knew something was not right. In the beginning, they were simple things, small changes. I left the keys in one place and found them in another. My cell phone, always carrying beside the bed, dawn disconnected and on the kitchen table. The door I was sure of having closed was ajar when I was back to the room. Banal things that could be explained, but the feeling of being observed never left me. It was an invisible weight, a silent presence that seemed to sneak into the corners of the house. No matter where I was, I felt a light shiver on the back of the neck, as if someone was standing behind me. And every time I turned, there was nothing. On the third night, something changed. He was in the office, distracted, turning the amulet between his fingers. The aged bronze reflected the weak light of the lamp, and I found myself analyzing the details. It was then that I noticed the marks on the surface looked different. Before, the design was vague, abstract, almost random. But now the carvings were clearer, more funds. They formed eyes. I frowned and rubbed my fingers over the metal, tried to convince myself that it was just a light trick. But it wasn't. The eyes were there, watching. A shiver traveled my pimple, and I felt the arm's skin shivering. My body reacted even before my mind understands why. That's when I heard the whispers. This time, they were lighter. My stomach turned around. The sound did not come from the house next to the street or anywhere else I could justify. It came from behind me. The air seemed to get denser, loaded. An unexpected cold spread through the room, and a strange smell filled my nostrils. Something metallic old, like rusty iron mixed with wet earth. I didn't want to turn around. Every fiber of my body screamed so that I would stand still to pretend I had heard nothing, but I couldn't. Slowly, I took a deep breath and turned the chair. Nothing. The room was the way I remembered. The bookcase, the rug, the curtains slightly swinging in the closed window. But the discomfort has not passed. The whispers had stopped, but I knew there was still something there. I got up slowly, with my heart hammering my chest. I went to the office door and looked down the dark corridor. Everything seemed normal, but the sensation was not. So it happened. The room light blinked once, twice, and a sound came to the hall. Something scratching the wall. Slow, dragged. My legs got stuck to the floor. The sound continued, getting closer, like nails scraping the surface. I swallowed dry, the dry throat. My whole body shouted for me to leave, but I couldn't move. The sound stopped. The silence was so abrupt that my own heart seemed to echo in the empty house. And then, the worst part, very close, close enough to feel the pressure in the air around me, the whispers began again. But this time they said my name. I turned so fast that I almost fell off the chair. Nothing, but I knew I had heard. The silence around me was absolute, suffocating, the kind of silence that should not exist in a house. No noise outside, no sound away from the street, not even the refrigerator buzz or the lightning of the furniture adjusting to the cold of the dawn. Just an overwhelming void. My heart hammered so hard that I felt my pulsation in the temples. I took a deep breath, tried to recover the control. But something was wrong. The office looked different, not because the furniture had moved or something. It was a subtle but undeniable change. The light of the luminaire seemed weaker, as if the darkness was consuming its shine. The air was denser, loaded with an electricity that made the hair on my arms shiver. I got up slowly, every muscle of my tense body ready to react. I walked to the living room, lit the lights. The yellowish flash swept the room, and for a moment I felt an irrational relief. Everything seemed normal, except for a detail. The office door was closed. I was absolutely sure that I had left her open. Swallowed dry, my instincts shouted for me to ignore, so that I simply leave the house, but my feet continued to advance. With my hands shaking, I turned the doorknob. Nothing. The door did not open. Locked inside. The stomach turned. I lived alone. So, on the other side, I heard a slow, drag scratch, like nails passing gently through the wood. Each cell of my body has froze. The sound was needed, methodical, as if something was testing the surface. No, not something. Somebody. My mouth dried up. My body wanted to run, but my legs were locked on the floor, as if they had been cemented. And that's when I realized. The amulet, it was no longer on the shelf. He was outside the door. The chest squeezed. My gaze fixed on a small object, resting on the floor, a few inches beyond the threshold. I could have sworn I had left him in the office. How'd he leave? Another scratch on the wood. This time a little stronger. The sound reverberated inside me like muffled thunder. Whatever you were there, I was expecting an answer. My breath became a weak whisper. The logic said to get out of there, but there was something in the air, something intangible that held me. A subtle movement. The light of the room licked, flashing for a brief second. And then, in the middle of that ghostly pause, I heard a whisper, clearer than ever. Low, hoarse, almost human, but there was something wrong with the voice. The words made no sense. The tone, however, was unmistakable. It was a call. My name. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body didn't answer. It was like I was stuck in a nightmare, aware of danger, but unable to react. Then the door ranged. Slowly. Alone. My heart stopped. A crack opened, dark and dense like an abyss. The air inside looked colder, loaded with a strange smell, something between rusty iron and burntwood. And inside that shadow, there was something I couldn't see, but I felt. A look, not like a person's, but something deeper, something that saw me beyond the skin, beyond the meat. My chest burned in despair. Fear, now uncontrollable, freed me from paralysis. I backed down, unintentionally kicking the amulet. The metal slid down the floor and into the doorway. The whisper stopped. The heavy air disappeared. The light stabilized, and the silence came back. The door was open. The office empty. The amulet was resting in the center of the room, intact. I didn't want to approach. I didn't want to touch him. I just left, trying to control my breath, trying to ignore the shiver on the back of the neck that told me that even without seeing, something was still there, waiting. The adrenaline was still throbbing in my body when I crossed the front door. The cold air of dawn involved me, but I didn't stop. I got in the car, turned the key with trembling hands, and only really breathed when I saw my house getting behind by the rearview mirror. No matter where I was going, I just wanted distance from that place. I drove to a friend's house. I didn't care before. I didn't send a message. I just knocked on the door, and when he answered with a sleepy face and confusion, I said the only thing I got. I need a place to sleep. He frowned, but let me get in without asking. I spent the night on the couch, without saying anything, without thinking about anything. I just wanted to forget, but sleep didn't come easy. Even there, in another house, with another energy, the sensation followed me. The same impression of being observed. The same shiver at the back of the neck. The same overwhelming silence. I tried to ignore, turn to the side, and convince myself that everything would look good when the sun was born. But deep down, I already knew this would not end that easy. When I returned home the next day, something inside me hesitated before entering. My key stopped in the lock for a moment. My breath was suspended. If I opened that door, what would I find? The house was as I remembered, all in place. No furniture moved, no strange shadow. The amulet was on the office shelf, exactly where I remembered I left. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if fear had distorted reality, transformed common noises into something larger. Maybe I was tired, stressed, but then I saw the clock. He was on the office floor, the glass of the cracked screen. I lowered myself slowly, took the object in my hand. My heart squeezed to see the frozen time on the cracked display. 3:17. The same time I heard the first whispers that night. The weight in the air came back. That inner cold, that dark foreboding. I never touched the amulet again. I never tried to understand what happened that night. But sometimes when I'm lying down trying to sleep, I feel that same presence, as if someone were there, just watching. And you? Have you been through something like this? And this was one of our followers' stories. If you want your story to be told by us as well, leave it in the comments below this video. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch it.